Good morning, everybody. We're going to be in Exodus chapters 13 and 14. Exodus chapters 13 and 14. I will not read all of both chapters. So I'm going to read Exodus 13, 3 through 10. And then what do I want to do in 14? I'm going to do, I will do verses 10 to 18. That's for the sake of slides as well here. Okay. Exodus chapter 13, I'll read this, and then I'll say, this is the word of the Lord, and then if you feel so led, you can say, thanks be to God. Exodus chapter 13, starting in verse 3. Then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today, in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give to you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You should tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, and that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute as at its appointed time from year to year. And then if you look at chapter 14, starting in verse 10. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks, Vito. You can be seated. As I read that, I got goosebumps like 4 different times. I feel a little bit overwhelmed at this passage. So let me pray again, and then we will try to capture 2 very significant chapters in God's word. So God, would you be with me? Would you be with us? We do feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of this scene. I do pray that it would be a story that we don't simply believe happened a long time ago, but would intersect with the realities and the fears and the needs that we are carrying into this room today, and the way we will wake up tomorrow and Monday morning, and the way that we see the future ahead. We don't want to just know about you, God. We want to know you. We want to love you. We want to experience you. We want to believe you. We want to follow you. We obey you. God, would you be with us to that end? We ask these things in the powerful name of Jesus. May the Holy Spirit, may he be with us and propel our hearts, minds, spirits, and souls to enjoy you and love you in this time. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Great to be with you. My name is Bryan. Always an honor to be back with you guys. Just love this church very, 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 very much, and feel unbelievably overwhelmed to cover these 2 chapters in a way that you will be glad that I was here as well. This is a lot. So let me kind of give you what I think is the heart of what Exodus 13 and 14 is, and then we will try to understand it. If I was going to title this, I don't ever really title sermons because it's kind of my least favorite part of the sermon process. But if I was going to title it, I would title it something along the lines of the mechanics of the life of faith. The mechanics of the life of faith. Like, this is what a life of faith with God actually looks like. It's like we're popping the hood and we're looking down on the engine block. Is that the right term? I don't know. Is Kyle here yet? But looking down onto this and being like, okay, here's how this practically works. If you've not already been able to pick up on my clumsiness, that I am unqualified to give any sort of mechanical analogies, you are very astute, and that is correct. I am the least, handy, mechanically apt person you've ever met. I go by Home Depot. I don't even have to go in. I get nervous just driving in front of one, They're like, this guy is not qualified to come in here. What is interesting is I had a major development in my life. It happened about 2 weeks ago. My family and I, my family will be here in the second service, but we just celebrated a year of living in Nashville. We lived in Denver, Colorado for 12 years before that. And I've hit a major milestone in my journey as a now Tennessean, is I own a pickup truck now. So it's like, I'm all in. Yeah, I'm all in here. Thank you very much. I hope that's not the peak of excitement for the sermon, but if it is, we've done pretty well, right? And it's funny, I had lunch with Pastor Derek a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about how much we've both always wanted trucks. We just felt like little kids, like little boys just talking about, I want to have a truck someday. And so I had a truck, but I went through this incredible process of trying to figure out, which truck. And it wasn't going to be a new truck. It was going to be a new to me truck, And so there was just this regular routine. Even though I'm not kind of mechanically apt whatsoever, there was a regular routine in my life of I don't know if anybody ever does this. Does anybody ever get like obsessive about this thing? You're about to make a big decision. You go down the deep dive of Reddit threads and YouTube videos. My poor wife, she would come in to our living room. We have 4 kids. I take 2. She takes 2 at bedtime, admittedly, and she would amen this. Her 2 are much more difficult than my 2 to put to bed. And so usually I'm arriving to the living room before she is. And night after night for the last few weeks, she would walk in and I would have another mechanical YouTube video up, and I'm learning about engine types, and I'm learning about cab sizes, and she's like, enough already. Like, what is this? Just make a decision. But isn't it interesting is when something in our life really matters, we can even get obsessed with the details. We can get obsessed with how something works. We can get obsessed with the mechanics, and that might be cars, that might be education, that might be where your food comes from. I don't know if anybody's gone down that YouTube, just brace yourself. I mean, whatever it is, we recognize that when something matters, even if we don't care about the mechanics, we start to care about the mechanics. The point of all of this is, what matters infinitely more than the car you drive or the job you work or the way you manage your money or where your food comes from is really 2 big questions. 1, who do you say that God is? 2, who does God say that you are? Those are the 2 most important questions you'll ever ask. It doesn't matter what your worldview is, your upbringing, your background, your belief about God. I mean, the reality is there's 2 questions that matter the most. Who do you say that God is? 2, who does God say you are? And the way you answer that question, those 2 questions, and the way we live in light of our answers is the life of faith, And so we have to understand how that means. Probably many of you are like me, I despise empty religious platitudes. I despise just saying things like live a life of faith, and you're like, how does that affect Wednesday afternoon? Exodus 13 to 14 is a real gift to help us begin to wrap our mind around the mechanics of the life of faith. And so wherever you are on your faith journey, maybe you've been following Jesus for a very, very long time, and he is inviting you to new and fresh challenges. Maybe you're in this room and you're trying to figure out about who God is and what he has to do with your life. Wherever you are on that spectrum, I hope you see that Exodus 13 and 14 is an incredible gift to help us understand the mechanics of what the life of faith really looks like. Now, we're going to see 3 particular themes emerge here. We'll just do them one at a time. The first is what we're going to see emerge in Exodus 13 and 14 is that faith, the moment of faith in your life, is where forgetting meets remembering. Okay? Where forgetting meets remembering. And we're going to start right in chapter 13 and verse 1, where forgetting meets remembering. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine. Now look at verse 3. Then Moses said to his people, let's say this next word together, Remember, let's say it together loudly. Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. I think if you were going to summarize Exodus 13, the first 16 verses of Exodus 13, 1 through 16, in a single phrase, it would be our surprising need to remember. Not just that we remember, but it's sort of surprising that we have to remember. What do we say together in verse 3? Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. The remember mandate is explicit, but there's an implicit theme of surprising. Why is it surprising? Well, consider what it is that they have to remember. Here's what they're being told they're going to have to remember. That God heard their cries for liberation in the midst of the oppression of enslavement from Egypt. That God appeared to Moses at a burning bush that was not consumed. That God sent Moses back into Egypt to perform signs and miracles. That he was with Israel and would deliver Israel. That God would escalate his judgment over the wickedness of Egypt and Pharaoh into 10 different plagues: water into blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, death of the firstborn. Not to mention that they will have to remember what we will see happen in chapter 14 of God is going to split the sea. You know the way you crack open a book, you're like, boom, right here. That's what God's going to do to the sea. And they're going to see it, and they're going to walk in the midst of it, and they're going to walk in the midst of it for a while. I was telling Rev Kev afterwards, there's a little bit of, just to show you where we're going, there's a little bit of debate, where exactly did they cross? How long did they walk? But one of the things I learned this past week in my study is a lot of times when I think of the splitting of the Red Sea, I think it's kind of from here to the back of the wall. But it was like one person I was even reading this morning, I was like, where was it? Can I give you greater clarity? I don't know. They're still doing the archaeological studies about this. But one person hypothesized they walked 10 miles. From end to end. And they didn't walk fast because they had children with them, right? As they may ever try, some of you are going to walk your kids out of this building and you're going to be okay, this, 10 miles. It's a slow, this is going to be a core memory, you would think. And God's you are going to have an annual week that is centered around you not forgetting this, for you needing to remember. Here's the thing. Here's why it's surprising. Just to continue down the self-deprecating angle. Another thing I'm not very good at is, I'm one of the most forgetful people you will ever meet. Again, I will walk out of our bedroom into our kitchen, and I'll just sort of stare there with a blank look, and my wife will be like, what are you doing? Why did you come to the kitchen? And I'm like, I don't remember. Does anybody else do that? Okay, thank you. Though I don't feel like I need to go get diagnosed with something. But it's I am an incredibly forgetful person, especially with small, seemingly insignificant details. I do feel like I would remember this stuff. I do feel like I would remember the plagues and the miracles and the deliverance and the walking through the sea. Of course, we would always remember that for the rest of our lives, right? Wrong, we won't. And we see it emerge even in this chapter that God's people are so exposed to the miraculous delivering hand of God again and again and again, and they forget all of it, and they're yearning to return back to slavery. Let me just give you an example from my own life, okay? Back in 2019, I was reflecting on this morning. Almost 5 years to the day, the church that I had planted and was pastoring in Denver, we went through this crazy moment of, I won't go into all the details, but basically, long story short, we needed to raise $1 million in 6 weeks. And our church was like y'all's church. We were city center, mostly 25-year-olds, new Christians, up to their eyes in school debt. So it wasn't just you wave a magic wand and people just give $1 million. And it almost killed me. It was the hardest, most demanding season for me as a leader, and I was coming home angry and frustrated, and I was coping through binging Netflix and Sour Patch Kids. It was not a proud season of my life, and my wife's trying to help, and I'm just venting and having these outbursts. And I remember this night, I'm getting chills, I feel it in my heart. I remember this night where my wife says, well, I know this seems impossible, but it also seemed impossible back when we were in seminary, and God miraculously provided for that huge medical bill. You remember that? And I said, what are you talking about? She's like, you don't remember that? I said, I don't remember that. And she goes, I can still picture where we were in our living room. She goes, you don't remember that time you were in seminary, we were making a combined like $20,000 a year between our 5 part-time jobs. I was in school, you were in school, and I had that tumor, and then I had to go to Duke to get it removed as an emergency, and we got a bill for like $50,000, which is a lot when you're only making $20,000 a year, and you were about to drop out of seminary, and we couldn't go into ministry because you were never gonna make enough money to pay for this bill, and we were gonna be in debt for the rest of our lives, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Duke just forgave the debt entirely. Go Blue Devils, because we didn't even really know how to ask. We just kind of brought it up to somebody and it worked its way through. And like the only explanation is that God stepped in and moved. Like, oh yeah, that did happen. That did happen. We are so amazingly forgetful of the greatest acts of God's faithfulness in our lives. You know, we look at me for a second, beloved. Here's what's particularly dangerous. Like this really intersects with the most important stuff of your life. All of us without intentionality that Exodus 13 is inviting us into, these rhythms of remembering, here's what's gonna happen. It's gonna be this we're in Tennessee, so it's gonna be a 2-step and it's gonna be a horrible 2-step, okay? All right, I'm just gonna, yeah, okay. Step number 1, you will have amnesia as it pertains to the greatest, kindest acts of God in your life. Now, if only it stopped there, but here's what's even more dangerous, is you will have a photographic memory of the things that go the worst in your life. Like, if only we just forgot, but we don't forget. We have photographic memory when things don't go the way we want them to go. So you envision this, like of course we exist in anxiety and fear and despair and hopelessness when all we do is look back on our lives, we forget the good that God gives us, we remember with unbelievable detail the things that we consider bad. Like how are you supposed to live with any element of faithfulness or hopefulness when that's the way we understand our lives? So consequently, we see the cruciality of the rhythm of remembering that emerges in Exodus chapter 13. He's telling them all this stuff you're seeing and experiencing, you will have to remember it because you will quickly forget it. And we already saw on display in our reading of Exodus 14, that is absolutely true. All these people who saw God's faithfulness are like, God brought us out here to kill us. Man, slavery wasn't that bad. Like at least we had food and there's graves there. Like it's crazy, and it's also the human condition. I mean, it's over and over again in Exodus 13, God instilling in his people their need to remember. Remember this day in which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you from this place. Verse 9, it shall be to you a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. Even we see, if you look down in verse 14 of chapter 13, we see the cruciality of the establishment of the multi-generational component of remembering, that the older generation and the faith community is passing down to the younger generation, because if we just assume or if we just sort of collectively go through the motions of remembering, it will be forgotten by the next generation. If you look at verse 14, it says, and when in time to come your son asks you, what does this mean? Talking about these rhythms of remembering with the celebration of the Passover. You will say to him, by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. This rhythm of remembering, simultaneously teaching the next generation so there's not forgetfulness to them of who God has been to their family. Two quick questions. I'm just going to give kind of questions of application as we go on, but we got to keep moving. One, I do wonder right now if God is prompting you to remember a moment of faithfulness from him to you in your own life that even like you need to tell somebody about today or write down, even like don't pull out your phone to like text right now, but if you need to pull up the notes app and just be like, you're right, I did forget about this. We're seeing that the human condition is to exist in a perpetual state of gospel amnesia and the stuff of life that's been best to us, okay? So one, just as we're continuing our time together, if God prompts you or reminds you in a certain way, I would encourage you to remember. And two, I would encourage you to just ask yourself, what are the rhythms of remembering in my life so I don't live in line with this like forgetting what's good, photographic memory of what's bad? Even, like, here's what's really important to understand, is so much of what spiritual disciplines are. So what I'm talking about is praying or reading the Bible or journaling or going to your community group or gathering together in this place are rhythms for the sake of remembering. They're rhythms for the sake of remembering. They're not empty rituals. They're rhythms for the sake of remembering. Even what's happening right now is for the sake of remembering. Gathering together. I know that the culture has shifted to a place where you're perpetually told, only show up to church once every, 2 to 3 months as it fits in your schedule with all the other dozen fun things that you have going on. One of the, not legalistically, but from a place of love, I would encourage you to be in this place like every single week. Like, you need more than an annual conference. Does that make sense? You need like a weekly gathering together of the saints of God for the sake of remembering. And that's even what's happening when we are gathering together in this place through the singing and the praying and the mingling on the front end and the mingling on the back end and then going to community group, is because we are not okay apart from regular rhythms of remembering. It's why it's important for you to show up and to be disciplined and to prioritize. Because if you're only here once every 3 months, you're going to forget, and then very quickly you're going to come to the conclusion of what's the use of ever coming at all. And then you'll be alone. And the most dangerous place a Christian can be is alone. 2, where desperation meets provision. Faith is where desperation meets provision. So Exodus 13 is the further institution of rhythms of remembering God's faithfulness. And then Exodus 14, we see the actual crossing of the Red Sea. Now, here's what's interesting is if you were sort of like a leadership strategic consultant of everything that happens in Exodus 14, and particularly the first half, before you see what God does, you would be like, this is the least strategic, quite possibly you could say dumbest thing that you could do if you're trying to get away from slavery. It's interesting. God very explicitly says, I could have taken you this, route that made more sense, but I'm not going to for 2 particular reasons. I mean, even if you just think about this, like, the exit route of like go camp against a body of water so as the large military is pursuing you, you have nowhere to go, is a very ineffective plan. And it's the one that God chooses. Now, he's very explicit about this in Exodus. Well, actually, if you look back in 13:17, we see the first of the 2 reasons that he goes this very crazy route. Verse 17 says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So it's almost like, this is kind of back to Home Depot. I do go sometimes. They do let me in every once in a while. But I'm celebrating that Halloween is over because I now can take the direct route out of Home Depot, because they will put up like the giant animatronic werewolves and witches and all that sort of stuff. Has anybody seen these things? It's like these 10-foot tall skeletons. And my baby, Ruthie, she's 3 years old, and she is not okay if we pass those. Like, we will be paying for it for days, not just the rest of the afternoon, like days if we go that way. So if you watch my route out of Home Depot, it is not a straight line. It is very curved to get around the animatronic witches for the sake of my baby. That's kind of what God is doing with Israel. He's like, if we take you the direct route, you're going to see the scary people you're going to go to war with, and you're going to go back to Egypt, and you're going to say the slavery was better than the scary things that are ahead of us as well. So that's the first reason. And then the second reason, verse 1 of chapter 14, then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi Hahiroth. Yeah, I know. I'm disappointed in myself too. So, Benji, how do I say that? Do you want to say it? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon, you shall encamp facing it by the sea. So again, if you didn't know what's going to happen next, this is where you would be looking at this scene and be like, this is the dumbest thing God could tell his people to do. By the sea, by the sea, by the sea. If you're trying to escape somebody who's chasing you, you want options, and you don't want a large body of water blocking you in. That is a terrible idea. It's almost like God anticipates that anybody who's reading this for the first time is like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going to kill them? So it's interesting, verse 3 starts with for, or because. It's almost like God anticipates our pushback. Well, why? Why would we do this? For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, and they did so. So look at this. This is very significant. Again, we're trying to live differently tomorrow as a result of what we're learning today. This might be of everything, and we're about to see an ocean, parted, a sea parted. But this might be what's so shocking because it's very counterintuitive to the way that many of us live our lives, is that God intentionally puts his people in a place of need and desperation so that they will build trust and intimacy of relationship, and so that the chief end is that God gets the glory that he deserves. The end goal to which God is sovereignly orchestrating the totality of this historical event is that God's people are desperate, and God builds faith through the deliverance of his people, that God's enemies are conquered, and God gets glory through the judgment of Egypt. Now, I think we're okay with that in theory until we think about this very critically, personally for our lives. Because what we're seeing is that God's goal is cultivating dependency and intimacy and neediness of relationship between us and him. And most of us, our definition of the good life that we are ruthlessly pursuing is self-autonomy, right? We have a huge aversion to neediness. You don't want to be described as being needy. Have you ever described anybody else as being needy in a positive light? Yeah? You're like, oh, they're so needy. Ugh, gross. Isn't that weird that God is intentionally putting his place and cultivating that they would be described as needy, so they have to cry out to him? Our goal is independence and autonomy. God's goal is neediness and relationship. And even if you think about this, some of you probably have background in some of this. Like, how is, if some of you are teachers, or if you work in like attachment theory or something like that, let me ask you this question. How is deep relationship cultivated between a child and a parent? How is attachment formed? The child has needs, and they reach out and they cry out over and over and over again, and a parent steps in and meets that need, and after 10,000 reenactments of that, they finally start to trust you. What if that's exactly what the life of faith looks like with God? What if over and over and over again, the very thing that we despise the most is the thing we need the most? What if, look at me for a second, I'm going to ask you a kind of haunting but actually beautiful question, because it might totally turn upside down the way you think about even what your life looks like right now. What if neediness is not to be avoided at all costs? What if neediness is the key that unlocks the treasure trove of relationship with God? God purposefully, intentionally takes his people a very non-counterintuitive way to put them into a place where they will cry out in desperation and need for them, and he will step in and provide for their need, and trust and relationship and intimacy will be cultivated. He will be their God, and they will be his people. And God is doing that today as well. Here's maybe just a question to consider and to ponder. Some of my fear and trepidation is a little bit like, I don't want to be overly simplistic to very overcomplicated or complex matters that I don't know, and so I'll just kind of float it and then let the Holy Spirit apply it as possible. But one of the things that I'm cognizant of anytime I speak anywhere is that every single one of you, either you yourself or somebody who is very dear to you, is going through tragedy right now. Every single one of you. It's either you or it's somebody 1 degree of separation away from you. It's just the nature of life in a broken and fallen world. And it's very easy. Satan is an accuser. That's the way Jesus describes him. Satan is an accuser. So a lot of times when we're going through, accusation. We sort of like, where is God? Does he love me? Does he care about me? What did I do wrong? A lot of times, what did I do to deserve this? I had a conversation even this past week with a young lady who's going through something really, really hard. And she's just like, I just feel like I'm being punished by God for this thing that I did wrong. Satan loves to accuse when tragedy and fear arise. And what if your neediness is not a reflection that something is broken about you, but actually you're being invited into the most beautiful invitation you could ever be invited into? Desperation, provision from God, relationship, intimacy with the one who loves you and fearfully made you in his image. And your tragedy, or that loves one tragedy, is actually an invitation into relationship. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it. I'm not trying to say it's easy. I'm not trying to say, hey, the ends make it no big deal in terms of what you're walking through. But this is who God is in the most terrifying of life's circumstances, is that our neediness is not despised by him. Our neediness is not discarded by him. Our neediness is welcomed. He is gentle and lowly of heart. That means he is safe and accessible and welcoming to heavy-laden, burdened men and women who are tired and overwhelmed by the tragedy of doing life in a broken and fallen world. And so that tragedy you're going through right now, that tragedy that loved one is going through right now, is an invitation, yes, to grieve, but also to come to the Father, to come to the Father. Third, where theory meets experience. Where theory meets experience. Look at Exodus 14:10. So Pharaoh takes the bait. I mean, that's kind of the image that God's using, is almost like that guy's a big dummy who's, just won't be able to contain himself, puts out the bait. Pharaoh takes the bait. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes. Behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly, and they cried out to the Lord. Here's their forgetfulness on display. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. That's so wild to say that. Leave us alone so we can stay in slavery. If only it were not us, too. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Moses said to the people, gosh, and what a couple of verses here. Fear not, stand firm, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Verse 15. I feel like almost I just should read this and then pray and be done, because it's like the text is unbelievable. The Lord said to Moses, and I love this in light of everything we just said, why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward. So it's almost like this moment of this tension, like they've cried out, now it's time to take the faith and put it into action. This is one of the amazing things about Christianity, is what differentiates Christianity from other worldviews and religions is it's not just about the accumulation of intellectual affirmation or theological ideas. It's an invitation into a relationship with the living God, and relationship has to be lived. It has to be practiced. It has to be acted upon. And here's the Father saying hey, no more crying out. Step out in faith. Step out in faith. By the way, as we're reading this, here's the third and final question I just want you to ask yourself. Is where is the Father inviting you to do this? Where so think, for example, you've gotten with your small group, or what D groups, what do they call them here? DNA groups? Okay, I knew I was close. DNA groups. So this is you, if you've shown up to your DNA group and for 8 months you've had the same conversation over and over again, and people you trust have been yeah, man, it's time to do something. And you're okay, I'll see you next week and we'll talk about it again. Rather than controlling it by mind mapping scenarios, it might be time to step out in faith and step out in a place of need to meet the provision of God. Where was I? Verse? Oh yeah, 15, thank you. Thank you for paying attention. Why do you cry to me? Tell the people to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots and his horsemen, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And if you jump down to verse 30, we see one of the greatest, most famous scenes of all the scriptures shown. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. The Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. God parts the waters in the same way that we crack open a book. Israel, for some very extended period of time, passes through for their salvation, and then God crashes down judgment. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. And it's a very interesting twist of poetic justice that Pharaoh, who had once sought to drown the Hebrew boys, leads his own young men of Egypt into a watery grave. God nudges, they go, they experience from faith into action. Do you see? Don't just cry out, but it is time to act. One theologian famously said, it's attributed to a bunch of different people, there's one thing about having a concept that honey is sweet, there's another thing to taste its sweetness for itself. This is the life of faith, to not just have intellectual ideas about God's provision, but to step into the mystery, into the unknown, into a place of dependency, declaring war on self-sufficiency, declaring war on autonomy, declaring war on cynicism that it won't go well, and to see God step in and move. And the only explanation is that God stepped in and moved. And what you're going to have, beloved, is a series of testimonies that you are able to remember and to celebrate and to testify to one another, to build one another's faith. And you will look back on your life of control. You will look back on your life of fear. You will look back on your life of anxiety. You will look back on a way of living a life where it's totally controlled by you, and consequently, it is very, very small as a result. And you'll say, I'll never want to go back. I'll never want to go back to Egypt. I despise that place. I hate that place. I don't long for slavery. I want to live in deliverance. The point, by the way, of all of this, I don't know if you ever had this feeling. I'm somebody who didn't grow up in church. So when I was reading these stories for the first time, I'm like, this is wild. You know, you're like, whoa, this is cool. Like, what would it have been like to be there? This is wild. Here's what's, of everything I've said, here's what's most important for you to understand, is perpetually in the scriptures, the point that the authors make as they are carried along by God, the Holy Spirit, is even scenes like this one that are wild and crazy, and what would that have looked like, and what would this have been like, and how could you ever forget this? They are merely opening acts for the main event of the gospel of Christ. That's all this is, which is kind of crazy, right? It doesn't diminish the significance of what unfolds here, but it builds our awareness of the magnitude of what Christ has afforded to us in the gospel. What stories like this give us assurance of is that in the same way as Israel was needy, clumsy, stupid, is that okay to say? The awkward silence makes me not know if that's okay or not. Stupid, you know? Not y'all, but them, right? I mean, even they are fighting God to the very moment of their deliverance. And to say, this is the way God treats clumsy, messed up, sinful, the only thing I can muster is my acknowledgement that I have need kind of people. And that God gives incredible deliverance. As amazing as it would be to have experienced, what would it be like to walk maybe 10 miles on dry land with walls of water on either side of you? We have afforded to us in the gospel the provision of deliverance, of walking from hell to heaven and into the land that God has provided for us, not because of what we've done, but because he has loved us and chosen to forgive us and to provide for us deliverance from the bondage of slavery that is sin to Satan, hell, demons, evil itself. This is not just a cool thing that happened a long time ago, although it is a cool thing that happened a long time ago. It's for us today. And so I ask you as a consequence, okay, what is it that you need to remember? One. What was my second question? What are my rhythms of remembrance? Thank you for telling me back. I told you I'm forgetful, so here we are at the end, and I'm saying that's not just theory. But yeah, what are some rhythms of remembrance? Two, where is it in tragedy that you're walking through right now that you're sort of sensing like, hey, you know what? I don't want to let Satan accuse me anymore. I want to be pressing into the unique heart of God of the way that He provides in the midst of neediness. And then third, where is God inviting me to practically step out in faith so I can have sort of one of these Red Sea Road experiences, to have something to remember? But above all of this, here's the question, is do you understand how this is afforded to you in the gospel, okay? How am I closing, Kevin? Am I closing? Am I the last? Okay, great, awesome. Do what I want. Oh boy, that's a lot of freedom. Okay, and I'm seeing I'm early, not late in terms of how much time we got. So, man, that's a lot of freedom and trust. So thank you. Hey, here's what I feel prompted to say is that rather than rushing out of here, even though everybody's got to go at some point, I know you all bring leaders forward for prayer a lot of times. So, pastors, elders, leaders in the life of the church, why don't you come forward? And whether it's to come forward to receive prayer or to talk to somebody you came with, I would encourage you. Can we talk about holy lingering? That's what I would be most encouraging of, is a holy lingering, to say, don't rush out of here, don't rush to the next thing, but linger to share with one another and to receive prayer, however God's prompted you to receive the help and the need in the way that you want. Okay, I want to read this again. And then I will close this in prayer. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been much better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." God, we're thankful for your word. We're thankful that you fight for us and you protect us. I particularly feel led to rebuke the lie that there are many people here who believe that nobody is watching out for them only other than them. It is very easy to feel that way. I think particularly if you grew up in a broken environment where maybe parents didn't watch over you and take care of you. I think it's particularly easy to believe that way if maybe you're single and you just feel like you're out on your own. But it's easy that way to feel like if you have kids. I mean, it's so easy to believe the lie that nobody is watching out for me, nobody is parenting me, nobody is protecting me, nobody is providing for me other than me, and consequently, it is all on me. And when we live that life, that it's all on us, we get scared, we get bitter, we get resentful, we get anxious. God, we rebuke Satan. He has no authority in this place. Christ is Lord. And consequently then, I pray that you would extend to us and afford to us the realities of this scene. Even though we come to you stumbling, clumsy, disbelieving, you do not discard us, you welcome us home. And you fight for us. We only have to be silent. Even right now, as we are silent before you in prayer, is an act of our surrender and our trust and our faith that you love us, you save us, you fight for us. Would the men and women who are in this room, who are your church, live that, believe that, and step into that victory in the coming week? We ask these things in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. Blessings, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. And how am I supposed to send this proclamation? You are go and proclaim. Okay.